Welcome to the latest edition of the World Cup of Darts performances, and this time we're going to focus on the World Matchplay. I'm joined by Paul Nicholson, who will talk us through 4 more iconic displays, and then you get to vote for the winner. So Paul, where better to start than Phil Taylor's historic victory over Adrian Lewis in the 2013 final?
I don't think anybody would dispute that this has to be in this list. We can wrap off so many Phil Taylor moments at the World Matchplay, from 1994 to his last one where he won it. But this one is the major standout, isn't it? Not just because of the fact that he was playing his protege in the final, who was in the peak of his powers, you could say. But at the same time, this one just had so many 180s. I believe there were 28 in the match. The average for Phil over a ridiculously lengthy match as well. Lewis battling back. But this was the ultimate final performance from Phil, and you could see it in his face when he won the title. It was extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, his average 111 compared to Lewis, who managed 106. That's the highest in a match play final and a televised major final. If it'd been much less, he wouldn't have even won.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There were some things happening around then. For instance, winning the Premier League with the 2 9-darters, he actually needed those 2 9-darters to win the match. And he needed this 111 to win this final. It's quite an incredible display. And we talk about people averaging 111 on the tour over best of 11, but this was over much, much more. To be able to sustain that for a couple of hours takes an extraordinary talent. That is exactly what Phil provided in that final against Adrian.
And it was, of course, hard to pick a Taylor match play performance because he's done so many. That year when he beat MVG, Lewis and Anderson in his farewell year, averaging 100 in all of them. The 9-darter against Chris Mason, averaging 112. And then when he averaged 114 against Gary Mawson in an era in the late 90s when that sort of thing was unheard of. So it was hard to pick this.
Yeah, very. I mean, we had to pick one of the Phil Taylor moments. We didn't want to give it the whole Phil Taylor show, which we could have done. But there were other games. I mean, one that stuck out for me was Terry Jenkins a few years after that 2013 final, where the crowd started to go for Terry against Phil in the match play. It was a strange atmosphere, but it's Phil's place, isn't it?
Yeah.
The match play. It always will be, and it was very fitting that he gets the first pick in this one.
Yeah. Now we'll go back in time to a performance that perhaps isn't talked about enough. Peter Evison winning the 1996 edition, 16-14 over Dennis Priestley. So why should this be a contender?
Well, it needs to be mentioned. You think about the standard of play in the mid-90s, there were only a handful of players who you thought could possibly get 100 average. The dartboards were different back then. The technology of the darts was different back then. The preparation and the professionalism of the game was only just starting to materialise the way it is now. And to have Peter Evison come through 5 matches at the 96 World Matchplay and beat both Taylor and Dennis Priestley en route to that final where he won it in 30 legs, 16-14, and averaging 100 against Phil Taylor and against Priestley, just makes you think, how good was that final? We can talk about all of the other great games, but this is really forgotten about. Peter Everson is a talent, phenomenal, but 1996 at the World Matchplay proved it.
Yeah, I mean, most people in that tournament didn't really get close to 100 average in any round. Yeah, he got the almost 104 against Taylor in round 2, thrashing him 8-1. Even he dropped off a little bit in his other matches average-wise, and then raised it again for 30 legs against Priestley. And to put it into a bit of context, nobody else averaged 100 plus in a match play final apart from Taylor until James Wade in 2008, and only 7 different players have managed it ever in a match play final. So to
There's
do it,
context, isn't it? It's all about context, this particular pick. And Evison was always towards the cream of the crop, in my opinion, flittingly. He would always duck in and out of being an elite player, somewhat nomadic and enigmatic kind of player, but technically absolutely wonderful. But you think about the next game after Taylor against Sean Downs, he did dip a little bit, so he was fortunate that his opponent didn't really show up in the quarterfinal. But after that, when he got through the semis and then ultimately the final, that final performance was extraordinary. And again, he denied Dennis Priestley getting a World Matchplay, never won one.
The third performance will go down still as probably the greatest comeback in televised darts. Andy Hamilton against Simon Whitlock, trailed 15-8, one leg from defeat, but then wins it 17-15.
You talk about comebacks in the world of darts, and this one is first. There was no other comeback that could have eclipsed it. Possibly if Eric had won the 89 Worlds against Jockey from 5-0 down, this possibly could have eclipsed it. But to be 15-8 and one leg from defeat for Andy Hamilton at a time in his career where he wasn't playing his best darts, this is the context of this one. He was somewhat fortunate to get into that field. He made the most of it. And in this match, it reignited his career because 6 months later, he made the world final. And then he got in the Premier League. If it wasn't for this comeback, I'm not so sure we would have seen Andy Hamilton in that world final or in that Premier League. So context there, very, very big. It mushroomed for Andy. But to be one leg from defeat and find yourself those legs from 15-8 down, it's an extraordinary comeback. I'll be befuddled if we get a better one than this at the World Matchplay in the future.
And the way he finished 25-19 bull.
It had to be, didn't it? Because when you have these great comebacks, they have to be done with something brilliant at the end. Just look at Whitlock versus Caven in the Europeans. He finished it with 146. So there's another bit of context for that one. But Hamilton's reaction at the end spoke numbers about what he delivered for the fans at that particular event and that match. It was extraordinary.
Last but certainly not least is Gary Anderson's victory over Mensur Sulovic in the most dramatic World Matchplay final ever in 2018.
I commentated on the first half of this final for the radio, and I'm going to be honest with you, when Gary was leading, I didn't think he'd be troubled. And at the time, I didn't know the backstory of Mensur Sulovic in the previous 24 hours, because after winning in the semi-final, he was not well during the night. He did seek some medical advice, and there was a time where Mensur Sulovic was not going to play in that final. So when you add that to the mix of the greatest World Matchplay final, it's an even better story. But the fact that Gary let his lead slip, Sulovic came back into it, and I was listening on the radio, driving on the way home to this, and I could not take my ears off it, because Sulovic, I thought, was going to win this one. He was playing amazing at the time, but Anderson, capable of just palming him off and hitting key shots at the right times to get his first match play.
It's when he was like 17-3 up, then he was 18-17 down, had that character, the bottle and that quality to come back. But then when he wired the bullseye to win it, which would have been, I think, 2018 to win, you kind of think, oh, it's maybe not his night, it is Sulovic's, but he still defied that 104 average of Sulovic to still get that done and complete that triple crown.
We've seen certain dart players show real grit and determination in really tricky moments, like when Thornton won the Grand Prix against Van Gerwen. He was constantly pummeled all match long. Now Anderson was in a bit of a corner, he was losing legs when he was coming towards the finish line, and that bullseye was heartbreaking. He probably thought, what have I got to do to get over the line here? But the fact that he was able to do so, I guarantee he slept really well that night, because to focus for 40 legs, to be at that standard, and the standard he was at throughout that entire tournament, because he was challenged against Cullen in the quarters, you just got to say that Gary really, really deserved that title, maybe more than any other title he won.
Fantastic stuff. Thanks, Paul. So all Sporting Life followers need to do now is vote on the Twitter poll below this video, and the winner will advance to the next round. We'll be back soon with Group C, which will feature 4 more incredible performances.